Hey guys, it's finally here. We've come to the last reason for the law of God on midweek worship at Cities Church. Hey, thank you for joining us. If this is your first time with us, my name is Jeff, and our church started this broadcast a couple of years ago to help hand off the faith or to teach the faith. If you want to know more about why our church exists or why we created this broadcast, look below me. You'll see some post notes to this broadcast today, and you'll also see a link to a YouTube video which will tell you why we started doing this a long time ago. We've been studying about the law of God, and I told you just a moment ago, this is the final lesson on the law of God. This is the final reason why God created His law in the first place. Now, when you hear law, some people think about like policemen and court and prison. When the Bible uses the word law, it's actually talking about the commands of God. In fact, what we're going to do is we're going to look into the law of God. We're going to look into it at a high level in just a moment. You see, we've been studying through the 3 reasons why the law of God exists. We've seen that there is a civil reason. 2 people can't live together in harmony with one another without there being some sort of rules, or else we would kill each other. We saw last week about the theological reason for the law, that the law is designed to be a teacher, a school teacher of sorts, and to teach our hearts that are bent towards sin what it looks like to love and to honor God. Well, now we get into a challenge, because in this 3rd and final reason for the law, it's going to describe the law as it relates to Christians. And I'm just going to tell you, there are some Christian theologians, some pastors, some Bible study leaders that have said, as a Christian, you don't ever have to obey the commandments of God ever again. And then there are some that say you have to obey all of the commands of God for the rest of your life. And then there are some that say something in the middle. Well, we're going to talk about those different ideas of the law of God in just a moment. Before we do that, though, I want you to get your heart ready for what your head is going to hear. Actually, your ears, because I don't know if your head actually hears, except for that goes through your ears. You know what I'm talking about. This is not an anatomy lesson. We're talking about law tonight. Stop getting me off on this subject. We're going to prepare our hearts for what we're going to hear today in just a moment. And in order to prepare our hearts, I think we should sing a song. Let's sing a song to Jesus about how good He is, about what He's done for us. So why don't you go ahead and turn the volume up on the TV? Why don't you go ahead and sing along with the words as they come on the screens, as this song helps prepare your heart for what you're going to hear from the Bible and the lesson that we're going to do in just a moment. Sing along, will you?
Thank you, Jeff. I love in Psalm 34 how it describes that we must taste and see the goodness of God. If you go into that root word of see in the Hebrew, it actually means to drink deeply of the goodness and the pleasures of God. So we're going to do taste and see now, and we want you to drink deeply from God.
Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good to me. You have turned my mourning into dancing, put off my wrath, clothed me with gladness, and I will rise, and I will praise you. I'll sing and not be silent. Oh, taste and see. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good to me. You have turned my mourning into dancing, put off my rags and clothed me with gladness, and I will rise and I will praise you. I'll sing and not be silent. Oh Lord, my God, I will give praise to you forever.
Hey guys, we're going to try to answer a controversial question. It's about Christianity and the rules of the Bible. Specifically, get this number, 613 rules just in the first 5 books of the Bible alone. If you were to put the rest of the books of the Bible in there, you're talking about thousands of rules. And over the centuries, Christians have asked the question, do I have to follow all of those rules? Do I have to follow some of the rules? Do I not have to follow any of the rules? Well, that's a tough question to answer. So in order to prepare your heart for hearing from the Bible, Romans chapter 13 in just a moment, in order to prepare your heart to wrestle with this question internally and then give an answer out loud, I got a short video. This video was made by the Gospel Project. Mad props to the guys at the Gospel Project because they're making really solid material to help teach the Bible to people that are kind of new to the faith, or teach the Bible in such a way that people who have heard the faith can understand it a little bit better. Well, the guys at the Gospel Project have created a short video, 5-minute video, to describe what we mean by the law. But hang on to the end, because these guys will also tell you how the law relates to Jesus and a little bit about how Christians are supposed to respond to the law. So why don't you check out this video, and then we're going to talk about what it says at the end in Romans 13, verse 8. Check it out, will you?
You're most likely familiar with the 10 Commandments in the Bible, stuff we generally take as good advice. Don't murder, don't steal, honor your parents, the list goes on.
And those are just the first 10. There are actually a total of 613 commands, all given to ancient Israel, found in the first 5 books of the Bible, which in Hebrew are called the Torah.
Now, the word Torah is usually translated in English as the law, because it has all of these laws in it. And as you read through them, you wonder, am I supposed to obey some of these, all of these? I mean, what's the purpose of the law?
Well, that translation is kind of confusing because while the Torah has laws in it, the book itself is fundamentally a story about how God is creating new kinds of people who are fully able to love God and love others. And when Jesus taught about the Torah, he said that he was bringing that story to its fulfillment.
So walk me through the story and how it's fulfilled.
So the story begins with God creating humanity who rebels. And God chooses Abraham to bless all of the nations through his family, who end up in slavery down in Egypt, and so God rescues them. Then at Mount Sinai, God makes a covenant with Israel, like an agreement. And all of the laws that Moses gives to Israel are the terms of that agreement. They're like a constitution. And so some of the laws, they're about rituals and customs that set Israel apart from the nations. Other laws are about social justice or morality. And by following these, Israel would show the other nations what God is like.
Okay, so the rest of the Torah is just the complete list of laws that Moses gives Israel?
No, the rest of the Torah just continues the story. And the 613 commands are only a selection from that original constitution. And even these have been broken up and placed at strategic points within the story. Now pay attention, because you'll see a really clear pattern. Moses gives the first laws to Israel.
Yeah, don't worship other gods, don't make idols.
And then right after that, there's a story of Israel breaking those very laws.
Yeah, they worship the golden calf.
And so Moses gives some more laws, and then you get more stories of rebellion. Some more laws, rebellion again, some more laws, more rebellion, and you start to see the point.
Right, no matter how many laws, they're just going to continue to rebel.
So at the conclusion of the Torah's story, Moses gives this final speech to Israel as they prepare to go into their new home. And he tells them, you guys, I know that you're not going to follow all of God's laws. You've proven to me that you're incapable. And Moses says the problem is that their hearts are hard and that they're going to need new, transformed hearts if they're ever going to truly follow God's law. And he was right. I mean, the story goes on to recount Israel's total failure.
They go into the land, they break all the laws.
Right. Now, the next section of books in the Jewish tradition are the 15 books of the prophets, and they reflect back on the story. For example, Ezekiel, he said that if Israel was ever going to obey the law, God's Spirit would have to transform their hard hearts into soft hearts. And Jeremiah said that's when obedience to God's commands wouldn't feel like a duty, but they would be written deep in their hearts. And Isaiah, he promised a future leader, Israel's Messiah, who will lead all of the people in obedience to the law. Now, in Jewish tradition, all of these books together are called the prophets, even the historical books, because they're continuing the story told from the perspective of the prophets.
Okay, so we have the law and the prophets, and they're telling one connected story about God's desire to bless the whole world through a people, Israel, who it turns out needs a new heart.
Yes, and Jesus saw himself as continuing that story. So he agreed with the law and the prophets when he taught that it's out of the human heart that come the most ugly parts of human nature. It's like the default setting of our hearts is opposed to God's law. But Jesus also said that he came to solve that problem, and in his words, to fulfill the law.
So what does he mean there, to fulfill the law?
Well, first he said that the demand of all of the laws in the Torah could be fulfilled by what he called the Great Command, that we are to love God and to love others.
So that seems pretty easy. I mean, we all want to love.
Well, we think we want to love. But Jesus showed how love is far more demanding than we realize. So he quotes the law, do not murder. And he says, yes, not killing someone is a very loving thing to do. But then he also says that when you treat someone with disrespect or when you nurse resentment against them, you're also violating God's moral ideal because you're not treating that person with love. And so Jesus said true love ought to extend even to our own enemies. So even though this command seems very simple, Jesus showed how our hearts are not currently equipped to fulfill even this basic command of God to love others.
And that's kind of a downer.
But where Israel failed, Jesus brought this story to its fulfillment. As Israel's Messiah, he fully loved God and others, and he showed all of the nations what God is truly like. He did this through his acts of compassion and mercy, and ultimately by loving his enemies even unto death. And after his resurrection, he told his followers that he would send God's Spirit to transform their hearts so that they could follow him and fulfill the purpose of the law, to love God and to love their neighbor. So this fulfills the story of the law and the prophets, or in the words of the Apostle Paul, the one who loves fulfills the law.
That video just introduced you to a small section of the law, the Torah, the 613 rules from just the first 5 books. And the reason why Jesus showed up on earth is because you could never possibly follow all of those rules perfectly. So Jesus came and he demonstrated what it looks like to follow the law of God perfectly. And then at the end of that video, it gave us a scripture reference from Romans chapter 13, verse 8. I want you to memorize what you just saw in this video. In fact, I want you to memorize the whole verse because the video only showed you part of Romans 13, verse 8. I'm going to put the whole verse on the screens. I'm going to ask you, would you make it a priority to memorize this verse? If you have a family, would you gather around at the dinner table this week and would you practice reciting this verse from memory? Romans 13, verse 8, here it is. Owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. Romans 13, verse 8. Now, at the beginning of this verse, it kind of sounds like the Bible is talking about money and your bank account. But actually, it's talking about much more than that. It's talking about the way that human beings are supposed to relate to one another. It says, don't get into the kind of circumstance where you owe somebody an apology, where you owe somebody to make up for a mistake that you've done, where you owe somebody forgiveness or they owe you forgiveness. Owe nothing to anybody is how the verse starts, except there's one thing that you really do owe to your neighbor, and that is to love your neighbor. Another way of putting it is Jesus, when he was asked all of those laws, Jesus, the crazy amount of laws in the Old Testament, which one of those laws is most important? And the Bible scholars who posed this question were convinced that they had just tricked him because any law that he gives next, there's a different law that somebody else will argue is more important. Jesus said, that's an easy question. I'll tell you the answer to that question. The most important law is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and strength. This is the most important commandment. But Jesus didn't stop there. He said the second most important commandment, and by the way, it doesn't show up in this language anywhere in those first 5 books of the Bible. The second most important commandment is just like it, meaning as important as the first. And the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. So what Romans 13 is challenging us is, don't owe your neighbor anything. Don't owe him an apology. Don't owe her a response to something that you did wrong. The only thing you should owe your neighbor is to love them. And by doing that, loving God and loving your neighbor, you've just accomplished or fulfilled the whole law of God. Now I got a challenge for you. And this question is supposed to be hard to answer. So if you just blurt out a quick answer right after I put this question on the screens, you probably aren't thinking about this enough. See, here's my question for you. I want you to wrestle with this for a second. And then when this broadcast ends, I want you to discuss your answer to this question. Here it is. Do Christians still have to obey specifically the 10 commandments from the Old Testament? Based on what you just heard from that video, based on what you've just heard from Romans chapter 13, verse 8, do you believe that we still have to obey those 10 commandments back in Exodus chapter 20? Think about it. Answer that question as we wrap up this broadcast of Midweek Worship. Thanks for being with us. I hope you have a great year in 2022. God bless.